for just a few moments. And what I'd like to do is a kind of, not really summary, but to provide more useful and I think meaningful information for the participants in Poland, to talk to you and ask you a question about truth-telling. Because when we start sharing resources, we'll continue this discussion. This concept will be coming up. And for some of us, it's not so obvious. And it may even sound strange to some of us. And I think this concept of truth-telling resonates in a special way with those of us who were growing up in communist Poland, in a completely different way. With those of us who were growing up on the former German territories, or like myself, literally on the German cemetery where my block was raised, on the cemetery that was liquidated in an official process of imposing oblivion back in the communist Poland. So the truth-telling is relevant to all of us, whether in post-colonial, post-war, post-communist, or post-whatever reality and context. And so my question is, what does truth-telling mean to you? What does it involve? And I know it's a broad question, but I think it would be very useful to hear from you what it means to you. And it's a question to whoever wants to start.
I feel like maybe if Naomi needs to leave, maybe it would be great to hear from you, Naomi, if you still have a minute or two.
Yeah, sorry, I do need to shoot off. Gee, what does truth-telling mean to me? I suppose in context to the current climate that we're in, living in Australia, truth-telling means to me, I suppose it's both parties. It's everyone. It's Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Working together, acknowledgement of the real truth. Not just one version of it. My experience on this repatriation journey certainly opened my eyes to some of the previous worldviews I just had no idea about. It's an important part of history. Definitely don't want to erase any of that, any of the bad things that happened, because it's what happened. So truth-telling is Indigenous people's truth, settlers people's truth, and telling it and including it, I should say. It's including all of the information, and I think some of the biggest issues that's faced, and some of the things that we grapple with is it's not acknowledged. Some of the wrongdoings that have happened in the past aren't really acknowledged, and it hasn't. That's the biggest part of reconciliation. So sorry, that was very not very well defined, but yeah, that's
perfect. Thank you so much, Naomi. I understand you need to go. You have other responsibilities waiting for you.
But thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you so much. That was a truly fascinating presentation, and I do believe we'll be in touch and continue this discussion. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Thank you.
And if I may, just for those who can stay, Sarah, you can stay with us for a moment. There is a question that I can see from Renata. Did any traces leading to Poland emerge during your research? You're muted. We can't hear you.
No, well, it came. That's why I said it came. I knew Corinna and Carsten Wergen, and Corinna had been doing work on Hermann Klaatsch, but we knew that he'd been to Australia, but we didn't know about the ancestral remains until they wrote that article about the. We just had no idea, and so we knew about cultural objects, and we were talking about the return of cultural objects, but did not know about the remains until very recently. And so that was the last piece of that sort of colonial story. So no, we had no idea. But their ancestors are just sort of, I have to say, sort of popping up all over the place. Just recently we found someone in Japan who'd been taken by, again, a very well-respected individual, Dr. Suzuki, who set up the Japanese hospital in Broome. Well, he just happened to be doing a trade in ancestral remains as well. Another guy, an explorer in Sweden, I went to, not Sweden, sorry, Norway. I went there. There are 6,000 skulls in their collection. Like, it raises the question, what are they going to do with 6,000 skulls? They're not all from Australia. 14 were collected by Knut Dahl in the 1890s. So they're just sort of falling in, but they all were doing it. But they all knew it was illegal because they all keep it quiet. And they don't have records. They don't have diaries about it. Corinna was able to read Klaatsch's letters, and it's in his personal letters that the story is exposed. They all knew that it was not kosher to be doing this. So, that's why I'm saying it's a surprise, and it absolutely, I don't think, one, it is truth-telling in the sense that it gives legs to the story of the colonial settlement and what happened, the physical abuses, the disrespect for the humanity of Aboriginal people, treating them like objects, denying them their cultural responsibilities, taking bodies, pretending they were in the packages that they were burying, that kind of thing. I mean, these were the missionaries doing that, for heaven's sake. So it was just really, really shocking.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Bits are just falling into place, little bit. So, yeah.
I'm glad we are on this path now. And so, Nara, you have Polish connection. I do acknowledge that time is, I think, is finished. But just very, very short question to Paul and Hilary, if possible. I was reading the other day that the 2022 Australian Reconciliation Barometer report reported that roughly 1/3 of the population do not know, here in Australia, do not know or cannot accept fundamental facts about our shared history. That's a quote from this barometer. And that only 6% of non-Indigenous respondents had participated in truth-telling activity in the last year. This was 2 years ago. Has anything changed?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that question because maybe I'll learn more about it when I go back to Australia in December. I'm currently in Vienna, in Österreich, in Austria. Just on this question of truth telling, it's a complex concept. I can only speak about it personally. When I was a young undergraduate at James Cook University in 1975, I think it was, I got to know Kath Walker, Oodgeroo Noonuccal, well. We campaigned together against what at that time was an exceedingly conservative government in Queensland. One of the things that Kath always said was that, keep in your mind the degree to which everyone always says there's a black problem in Australia. It's actually a white problem. And that kind of has always stayed with me. I mean, it may seem a simple thing to say, but in fact, it's actually a very profound and important point. And as a historian ever since, I've aimed to try to, as much as possible, to explain what happened in all of its complexity. The problem that we have with dealing with the scientific past and the ambitions of scientists is the way that terms like trophy hunting, selling and trading. All of these terms actually don't really match with the records. When we start looking at it, we begin to understand the degree to which this has to be understood, in terms of what the scientific aspirations of people were, but also the ambitions and rivalries between scientists at that time. And in this particular case, it seems to me that Klaatsch is determined, as it were, to be the authority in the field of human evolutionary studies at the turn of the 20th century. And this drives his ambition. I mean, I'm always struck, for example, that if you go to the Church of St. James in Sydney, there's a memorial to John Gilbert, who was the ornithologist on Leichhardt's expeditions. And his tomb, his memorial, actually says that it is sweet and decorous to die for science. Gilbert was actually killed by Aboriginal people for transgressing a sacred site in 1845, and this is certainly what happened to him. But it's important to understand that, because ultimately science is a very human activity, like every other activity. And one of the things that worries me, and it's always driven the historical work I've done, is the extent to which, as I mentioned before, those who oppose repatriation, or those who put the scientific argument for the continued access to remains for study, always say, "Oh, our science is different." The second thing they say is, "Oh, they were terrible racists in the past. They that's that, but that's all changed now. It's all different." Well, in terms of the science that was taking place, yes, it's changed. In terms of the blatant racialist assumptions which were implicit within the culture in which this science took place, yes, they are no longer there. But we have to ask ourselves whether the continued aspirations and ambitions of scientists, when it comes to things like DNA analysis of remains, taking of data without proper consultation to Aboriginal communities, all of these kind of issues, which ultimately are driven by the sort of ambitions that one finds in the academic sphere, we have to ask ourselves whether the lesson from looking at the past is to realize that science continues to be a human activity. And so in terms of truth-telling, I think that my point of view has always been that ultimately the importance of historians is to basically tell that complexity, and ultimately to get people to see the degree to which those kind of very human dimensions of science are still with us, and we must address the kind of ethical and the moral issues that they raise. It is simply not good enough to sort of say, yes, is this the past? Yes, it was terrible. Oh, now let's all move on because it's different today. Well, the question is how different? How different is it? On that general question then of just, it's a very complex thing to talk about contemporary responses and reactions to truth-telling today, particularly after what the Queensland government has done in shutting down truth-telling within that state, which is outrageous. But it is ultimately the job of academics to be talking to audiences, assuming that there is still this white problem, as it were, settler problem within post-settler society that we need to address, and to welcome, obviously, the wealth of stories and knowledge that comes from Indigenous people around Australia to contribute to that process of truth-telling. And then I think there is the work of how we reconcile all of this.
Thank you so much, Paul. And the question was also asked to Hilary, but we're really running out of time. But it stays there, and we are meeting after the break and after 2 further presentations. So please, bear it in mind. And I'm sorry to cut it like that. Thank you so much